Imagine a world where your entire life savings, carefully stashed away for years, suddenly becomes worthless, not over a decade or even a year, but in just a few weeks. Picture needing a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a single loaf of bread. This isn't some dystopian fantasy. It was the harsh reality for millions in Weimar Germany in 1923. People were literally papering their walls with money because it was cheaper than wallpaper, and kids were building kites out of bank. This is the story of hyperinflation, a monetary apocalypse that didn't just wreck an economy, but tore apart the very fabric of society. The scariest part, the seeds of this crisis were planted long before the chaos erupted, and its echoes can still be heard in economic crises around the world today. So, stick with me as we dive into how a nation lost its mind over money and uncover the chilling lessons it holds for all of us. And hey, if you find this fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. So, how did Germany, a proud industrial powerhouse, fall into this abyss? We need to rewind the clock to 1918. Germany has just lost World War I. The Treaty of Versailles is a brutal blow. It forces Germany to accept full responsibility for the war and, crucially, to pay massive reparations to the victorious Allied powers. We're talking about a sum so colossal. It was designed to keep Germany economically crippled for decades, minus 132 billion gold marks. Think about that. A country already devastated by war, with its industrial heartland occupied, is now saddled with a debt it can never hope to repay. To meet these demands and finance its own post-war reconstruction, the German government did what many struggling governments do. It started printing money. At first, it was a trickle, a way to pay war pensions, fund social programs, and keep the government running. But this trickle was about to become a tidal wave. The German mark, which had been stable for decades, began to slide. In 1914, it was about 4 marks to the US dollar. By early 1922, it was nearly 200 to 1. This was bad, but it was just the appetizer. The main course of chaos was yet to be served. The breaking point came in January 1923, when Germany inevitably defaulted on its reparation payments. France and Belgium took matters into their own hands. They marched their troops into Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley, to seize coal and steel as payment in kind. The German government, militarily powerless, called for passive resistance. They urged the workers in the Ruhr to go on strike, to stop producing anything for the invaders. But how do you pay millions of striking workers? You guessed it. You print more money. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a societal breakdown. Trust, the invisible glue that holds a society together, dissolved completely. Imagine getting paid in the morning and rushing to the store immediately, because by the afternoon, your wages would be worth half as much. People started bartering. A pair of shoes was worth more than a suitcase of cash. Farmers refused to sell their produce for worthless paper, leading to severe food shortages in the cities. The middle class was wiped out. All their savings, their pensions, their bonds, everything they had worked for, became worthless. A lifetime of prudence and hard work meant nothing. This created deep and lasting resentment. Who benefited? People with debt, as they could pay it off with worthless money, and speculators who bet against the mark. This created a perception of a rigged system, where savers and workers were punished while gamblers and debtors thrived. Social norms broke down. Theft became rampant. The crises pitted city dwellers against farmers, workers against business owners, and created a sense of profound instability and injustice. People lost faith, not just in money, but in their government, in their institutions, and in each other. It was a moral and psychological catastrophe. Just when it seemed like Germany was on the brink of complete disintegration, a miracle occurred. In November 1923, a new government led by Chancellor Gustav Stresemann took a radical step. They introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark. Now, this is the fascinating part. The Rentenmark wasn't backed by gold, because Germany didn't have any. Instead, it was supposedly backed by a mortgage on all of Germany's land and industrial assets. In reality, this was a clever psychological trick. There was no practical way for anyone to actually claim a piece of a factory with their Rentenmark. But what it did was restore confidence. To make it stick, the government did something incredibly painful, but necessary. They stopped the printing presses cold. They balanced the budget overnight by firing thousands of civil servants and slashing spending. They also set a fixed exchange rate. 1 new Rentenmark for 1 trillion of the old, worthless papier marks. The effect was instantaneous. Within 72 hours, the hyperinflation stopped. Prices stabilized. The chaos ended. It was an incredible feat of economic policy and public psychology. The Rentenmark miracle showed that the value of money is ultimately a story we all agreed to believe in. By introducing a new story, Backed by decisive and painful action, Germany managed to pull itself back from the edge. But the scars of 1923 ran deep, and the political consequences were devastating. The hyperinflation crisis had created a generation of people who felt betrayed and impoverished. It destroyed the moderate middle class, which is often the bedrock of a stable democracy. In its place, it fostered extremism on both the left and the right. People were desperate for simple answers and strong leaders who promised to restore order and national pride. Does this sound familiar? In the midst of the 1923 chaos, a small, fringe political party in Munich tried to seize power. They were led by an obscure figure named Adolf Hitler. His beer hall putsch failed miserably, and he was thrown in jail. At the time, he was seen as a joke, but he and his Nazi party had tapped into the bitterness and anger of the people. They blamed scapegoats, the politicians, the Allies, and Jewish financiers for the nation's humiliation. While the Rentenmark stabilized the economy for a few years, the memory of the wheelbarrows full of cash never faded. When the Great Depression hit Germany in 1929, bringing mass unemployment, people remembered the instability of the Weimar Republic. They craved a strong hand to guide the ship. The democratic parties seemed weak and ineffective. The extremists, who had been waiting in the wings, now looked like a viable alternative. The path from the printing presses of 1923 to the rise of the brown shirts and the end of German democracy was a direct one. Hyperinflation had not only destroyed savings, it had destroyed faith in democracy itself, paving the way for tyranny. The story of Weimar Germany isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a timeless warning. It teaches us that hyperinflation is never just about economics. It's a political and social disease. It asks what happens when a government loses all credibility and resorts to the printing press as a solution to its problems. We've seen similar, tragic stories play out in other countries, like Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and more recently in Venezuela. The pattern is always the same: unsustainable government spending, a loss of productive capacity, and then the fatal decision to print money to cover the gap. This leads to a vicious cycle where more printing leads to less confidence, which requires even more printing. The end result is always economic ruin and immense human suffering. The core lesson is that a stable and trustworthy currency is the foundation of a stable society. It's a social contract. When that contract is broken, everything else begins to fall apart. It reminds us why independent central banks and responsible fiscal policy are not just boring technical details. They are the essential guardians of our economic and political freedom. The story of the papier mark is a stark reminder that the road to ruin is paved with easy money promises. The story of hyperinflation didn't end with Weimar Germany. The nightmare of money losing all meaning, of a lifetime of savings evaporating into thin air, has tragically repeated itself in the 21st century. The ghosts of 1923. Germany haunt the streets of Zimbabwe in the 2000s and Venezuela in the 2010s. These modern crises are a stark reminder that hyperinflation is indeed just a history lesson. It's a clear and present danger that can strike anywhere at any time. Imagine walking into a grocery store in Harare, Zimbabwe. Back in 2008, you grab a loaf of bread and head to the checkout. The cashier rings it up, and the price is trillions of Zimbabwean dollars. Trillions. A number so large, it's almost meaningless. Yet, this was the daily reality for millions of people. At its peak, Zimbabwe's hyperinflation hit an unbelievable 79.6 billion%. That loaf of bread, which might have cost $5 just a few years earlier, now required a wheelbarrow full of cash. People's life savings, their pensions, their salaries all became worthless almost overnight. So, how did this economic catastrophe happen? It was a perfect storm of disastrous policy decisions, political chaos, and out-of-control money printing. The government's controversial land reforms crippled the agricultural sector, the backbone of the economy. To cover massive budget shortfalls and fund its spending, the government simply turned on the printing presses. The result was an unstoppable inflation spiral that devoured the nation's wealth. Zimbabweans, in a desperate bid to survive, became masters of improvisation. Foreign currencies like the US dollar and the South African rand became lifelines. People reverted to barter, trading goods directly when their own money was worthless. Ultimately, the government had to abandon its own currency entirely. The human cost was immense. Hospitals ran out of medicine, children went hungry, and society itself began to fray. The lesson from Zimbabwe is brutal. Hyperinflation doesn't just destroy money. It destroys trust, order, and the very fabric of a nation. Now, let's fast forward a few years and travel thousands of miles to Venezuela. By 2018, this once prosperous oil-rich nation was in the grip of hyperinflation, reaching a staggering 1,000,000%. Prices were doubling, sometimes in a single day. Cash was so useless that people would spend hours in line just to withdraw enough for one meal. supermarket shelves were empty, hospitals had no medicine, and constant blackouts made life a daily struggle for survival. The causes were hauntingly familiar. An economy dangerously reliant on a single commodity, oil, combined with decades of economic mismanagement, unsustainable government spending, and, once again, the reckless printing of money to patch fiscal holes. The Venezuelan bolivar, once a symbol of stability, was now less valuable than the paper it was printed on. Just like in Zimbabwe, Venezuelans turned to foreign currency and barter to survive. The US dollar became the de facto currency, a parallel economy running alongside the collapsing bolivar. Those who could adapt quickly found ways to get by. Those who couldn't were plunged into extreme poverty. And once again, trust in the government evaporated, and social cohesion crumbled under the strain. These modern examples drive home some timeless truths. First, hyperinflation almost always follows the same script. Reckless government spending, a collapse in the country's ability to produce goods, and a central bank that just prints money to solve every problem. When a government chooses the printing press over real economic reform, the currency's value and the people's trust are the first casualties. Second, ordinary citizens always bear the brunt of the crisis. Their wages become meaningless, their savings disappear, and their lives are thrown into chaos. Just as in Weimar Germany, the middle class, the bedrock of social and political stabilities, utterly wiped out. And third, political instability inevitably follows. Desperation breeds radicalism. When people are desperate, they often turn to strongmen or extreme ideologies that promise simple fixes to complex problems. It's a vicious cycle that we've seen throughout history. Economic mismanagement leads to social breakdown, which in turn leads to political upheaval. While hyperinflation is a terrifying prospect, it doesn't have to be a complete surprise. There are lessons that governments, investors, and everyday citizens can learn to spot the warning signs and protect themselves. For governments, the playbook is clear. First, keep deficits in check. Chronic overspending funded by printing money is the primary cause of almost every hyperinflation crisis. A country that consistently spends more than it earns is sitting on a ticking time bomb. Second, protect the independence of the central bank. When politicians can force the central bank to print money to fund their projects, public trust is destroyed, and the inflation spiral begins. And third, act decisively. Germany's Rentenmark miracle worked because the government took swift, credible action to stop the money printing and implement real reforms. Hesitation makes the problem infinitely worse. For investors and ordinary citizens, the strategy is about building resilience. First, diversify your assets. Holding all your wealth in a single, unstable currency is a recipe for disaster. Gold, stable foreign currencies, and real assets like property have historically been safe havens when paper money collapses. Second, think about tangible resources. Food, fuel, and other essential goods hold their value when money doesn't. Strategic stockpiling can be a literal lifesaver. And third, be psychologically prepared. Hyperinflation erodes more than just wealth. It erodes trust, relationships, and social norms. Staying vigilant and building strong community networks are crucial for surviving both the economic and the social fallout. So, what are the red flags to watch for? Hyperinflation rarely appears out of nowhere. Look for rapidly increasing government debt, especially when it's funded by printing money instead of real economic growth. Watch for persistent budget deficits and a falling currency value, which makes imports more expensive and lowers living standards. And a huge warning sign is when prices are rising much faster than wages. If your daily expenses are growing faster than your income, it's time to pay attention. If you sense a crisis is coming, act early. Convert your cash into stable assets before everyone else does. Be prepared to use barter and alternative currencies. Your skills in farming, medicine, or repairs can become more valuable than cash. The story of hyperinflation, from Weimar Germany to Zimbabwe and Venezuela, is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a profound lesson for every government and every individual. Money has no inherent value. Its worth is a collective belief, a social contract built on trust. When that trust shatters, everything else follows. For governments, credibility is everything. Printing money is a short-term fix with catastrophic long-term consequences. For citizens, the message is to diversify, be resilient, and never assume that the stability you enjoy today is guaranteed tomorrow. History repeats itself. By understanding the lessons of the past, we can better prepare for the crises of the future. The next time you hear about governments printing trillions or debts spiraling out of control, remember those wheelbarrows of worthless cash. Remember that the value of our money and the stability of our society depends entirely on confidence and credibility. Once lost, it can take generations to rebuild. Thanks for watching, And if you found this valuable, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this. Stay safe and stay informed.